I think it might be helpful to hear your views on the risks of investing in these markets or this region broadly, and how they've evolved over the past 10 years and where they're headed directionally.
There are definitely still risks. This is an area where one can't necessarily generalize. I mean, there's been convergence in some regulatory and trade dynamics, but not harmonization. So in that sense, country by country varies quite drastically. If you look at, again, India and the political risks of investing in India in IT or other areas, they've been high. If you look at Indonesia, there's still expropriation that can happen. Indonesia doesn't want to sign investor-state dispute resolution clauses in its agreements, that kind of thing. Of course, China carries a lot of political risk. So it varies country. There's corruption across the region and so forth. So different kinds of risks in different places. Currency risk has been a deterrent, of course, for a lot of investors, particularly in private equity and just equities generally. Remember that so much of the wealth in this region is in private markets and private hands. Over the last 20 years, I've heard so many times Western investors, portfolio investors say, look at the market cap of the stock exchanges in Asia, it's tiny. Well, you're barking up the wrong tree in a way. Asian wealth is in private hands and most of it is going to remain in private hands. Yes, you will have more IPOs, that's happening obviously. You're going to have definitely more listings and more privatization, this is critical. Where there is momentum towards privatization today, and this is happening across ascending Asia, I view that as a positive sign because the rules involved are certainly more strict. Where you're going to have more cross-listing of exchanges, you'll have to have some upward compliance towards standards like Singapore's SGX and so on. So on the one hand, there's clear progress. Let's remember that even the baseline condition is that we have systematically overstated risk in Asia, systematically overstated. So that's important. So I shouldn't have to necessarily defend investing in Asia. We should say, wow, we missed a lot of opportunities by kind of overpricing the risk. But even with that in mind, the reforms underway right now across the region, again, in the spirit of the learning from 98, 2008 pandemic, these are very positive, locked in steps. Countries want to protect their credit ratings, they want to maintain their strong reserves, they want to keep inflation in check, they want to maintain their trade surpluses. They want to do all of those things right because that's served them well. How do you do it? You need more foreign investment, right? So how do you get more foreign investment? Well, investors aren't fools, right? You've got to actually treat them right. So I do view today's reforms around privatization and deregulation that are underway as being pretty credible for foreign investors.
That's helpful. Are there countries that stand out to you as kind of farthest down the track of really focusing on not necessarily improving, but sort of solidifying corporate governance and like a strong investor protection regime in order to attract that FDI?
The baseline is very different in each, across just Southeast Asian countries. I just want to remind everyone, this is something to remember for the next 10 years. If Southeast Asia were a country of 600 million people, 700 million, it would be by far the most unequal country in the world, right? It has a lot more billionaires than Africa, and it has hundreds of millions of poor people still. So by definition, by Gini coefficient, this is the most unequal region of the planet. And yet here we are in the zone of opportunity because Asian governments, Asian investors, Asian corporates, Asian families, Asian wealth is looking at their own region saying, what can I do to raise the floor? What can I do to reduce poverty? What can I do to improve opportunity, right? That's the overall mentality I think people have to remember. They're focused on combating poverty and lack of access, and they know that inequality will eventually iron out bit by bit by bit. That's just a psychological point that I think is very important. In terms of countries that are furthest along in terms of getting it right, so again, it depends on where they've been, but Malaysia, you could say, has had a really rough patch the last couple of years, given the 1MD scandal, political turnover. One has to think that they've learned their lesson, right? It's a self-inflicted wound. And here's another macro point about the region. The Vietnam War was a long time ago. This is not a region that is being invaded, right? Every problem in an Asian country is mostly a self-inflicted problem, which also means that it can be fixed. Whether it's corruption in Vietnam or Malaysia, whether it's the political unpredictability of Thailand, which despite it all has maintained a very steady investment regime, foreign investors have more or less equal treatment in the country, which has been a very strong asset for them as they try and attract capital in. And whether it's the issues around political continuity in Indonesia, where I think that there is, in Latin America decades ago, this used to be called the New Left Consensus. It meant that no matter what government gets voted in, whether it's Brazil or Chile, this is the good old days, like the 90s, there's going to be a steady course, social investment, infrastructure, do the right things, right? Now, I would say there's a similar kind of, call it the New Asian Consensus. I don't know who the successor to Modi or Duterte or Jokowi or whomever is going to be. I don't know who's going to come after the junta in Thailand, or who the next president of Vietnam is going to be, or prime minister of Malaysia next week or next month. I don't know. But I can tell you that there is a new Asian consensus, a set of policies that the government, citizens, investors, companies know is the right thing to be doing. And you saw this in the pandemic. It's, immediately extend more credit and support to households and small businesses to keep them afloat, keep the infrastructure investment going, these kinds of things. And so I think governments do genuinely understand what they need to do to maintain this momentum.